Hi there, welcome to another episode of Enabling Tomorrow. I'm Tim Metz, I'm the Marketing Director at KOS, and I'm your host. And I'm here with Max Cuvellier, who's the Head of Mobile for Development at GSMA. Welcome, Max.
Welcome, thank you.
Great to have you on the show. I'll give a quick intro, and then I'll ask you for more details. So Max Cuvellier, Head of Mobile for Development at GSMA. He manages a team of 120 people there. And they work to use mobile technology and innovation to reduce inequality in the world, which is of course something that we're all about also here at Enabling Tomorrow. You work with the private sector, the public sector. It's super interesting. So I look really forward to dive into the details with you about what your day-to-day looks like, the kind of projects you're working on, and how did you get to this position and working on this. But could you start with giving a quick intro of Mobile for Development and maybe also of the GSMA for those people who don't know what the GSMA is or does?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. So in short, the GSMA is the Trade Association of Mobile Network Operators. We have about 750 mobile operator members and an extra 400 associate members from the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And we represent the interest of the industry through work around advocacy. We do a lot of convening and also a lot of work on technology. And Mobile for Development is a specific unit within the GSMA that was set up a little bit over 10 years ago, when mobile really was booming, in particular in low and middle income countries. So it was maturing in quote unquote the West, but still like seeing double, sometimes triple digit growth in low and middle income countries. And it was clear to a lot of people that it was not just bringing connectivity and the ability to call your family or your friends, but bringing a lot more. There were a lot of services, essential services that were attached to it. So the team at the time set up to look at what those services were and how we could support. 10 years later, we've been active in, I think, about 70 countries. We've impacted through our work, and when I say we, it's the work that we do, but most importantly, enabling our partners, public sector, private sector, a little bit over 75 million citizens across mostly Africa and Asia Pacific. And what we do is we look at digital innovation that can solve socioeconomic challenges or address socioeconomic opportunities, and looking at things from a private sector angle. And what I mean by that is basically we look at business models. We're interested in projects, ideas, solutions that will be commercially sustainable eventually, because we believe that that's the way to basically build sustainability and scale eventually.
And then, so how do you find those good ideas, and what do you do when you find a good idea? What are the tools or in your toolkit?
So some of these ideas come to us directly. In particular, we work with our members, mobile operators, who, at least when we started 10 years ago, they were the one bringing those ideas. But what we've seen over the years, and in particular in the past 5 years, is their approach now is a lot more collaborative. There are still a few areas where mobile operators are leading, and I think mobile financial services is definitely one of them. But their approach now is to really leverage innovation and those great ideas in the ecosystem. So what we've seen, for instance, in the past 5 years, a complete change of mindset in terms of how they work with local SMEs or startups in particular, because they realized that basically there was a really good opportunity to work together. The mobile operators have access to scale in many ways. They have large number of users, they have access to payments, they have distribution networks on the ground, very strong brands, very big address books, links to governments and regulators and so on. But yeah, innovation is hard when you have to focus most of your resources on building and maintaining a network. And at the other end of the table, you've got the startups who really are coming up with this innovation. They're a lot more agile, they can fail, they can pivot and so on. But when it comes to accessing scale, it's a lot harder. Access to capital in particular is hard, but what we found is with a good partnership with the mobile operators, you can really create quote unquote win-win situation where the mobile operators leverages the new service, the innovation from the startup or the SME, while the SME basically just gains to like fast tracks everything by working with a mobile operator to reach scale.
Okay. And so how does it translate in like what does your day-to-day look like? Are you talking to startups? Are you making decisions on investments? Or how should I imagine your role in all that?
So I'll describe the day-to-day of the team more than my day-to-day probably. But what we do basically is three core activities. One is we still do a lot of research and insights because a lot of the topics that we work on are still under researched, or even if like some basic research has been done, there's a lot more needed to understand what really is happening. So for instance, like we have some flagship reports like the State of the Industry report on the mobile financial services side, which is a different type of report because it's an industry in the past 10 years that's really matured, in particular in Africa. So it's about looking at what progress has been made and what are the new trends coming. But in terms of understanding challenges, for instance, there's our mobile gender gap report that we publish every year that looks at like, how are women faring compared to men in terms of access to mobile, but specifically mobile internet and mobile financial services. And then we do a lot of research on other topics in areas that are sometimes like under-researched for a variety of reasons. So we got a very strong practice on humanitarian, for instance. So looking at humanitarian and technology is an aspect we've worked on a lot in the past 3 years, or in the past 6 to 9 months, we've started working a lot more on disability, for instance. There are close to 1 billion people with disabilities around the world, and very little research, in particular in low and medium income countries, about how technology can support them. So that's one area, research and insights. The second area is on advocacy. Once you understand the problem, is trying to work with both the private sector, the public sector, international organizations, obviously the donors who fund us, in terms of like identifying positions and steps that can be taken to address these issues. And then the last angle of what we do is what you could call technical assistance, basically, which is supporting specific projects on the ground. And that could be working with a mobile operator and a regulator to change the way refugees can access mobile services, generally speaking, work that we've done in Uganda recently. Or it can be a lot more hands-on with de-risking of projects. So we've had quite a few rounds of what we call innovation funds in the past few years, funded by DFID, DFAT, USAID, and others, where basically we, through a very robust selection process, identify projects on the ground, mostly run by private sector organizations, most of them startups actually, and support them with funding, with mentoring, visibility, technical assistance, and so on. So these are kind of like the three areas of what the team does. My day-to-day is a little bit different. I used to write reports. I used to work on these projects. Now my focus is mostly on trying to create the right environment for the team to thrive.
And then what kind of people are on the team? Is it a mix of like researchers and fund managers and programmers or something? Or what kind of people should I imagine are on your team?
So that's a very good question. We've got a very diverse team. I think it's a good mix of people who come from the development world and people who come from the commercial world, with a common mindset, which is trying to meet in the middle and really looking at innovation, socioeconomic impact, but searching for business model. And then the type of skills, we have people with sales background, for instance, because it's quite helpful when you have to go door to door to try and identify projects or get to work with mobile operators on specific topics. We have strong people like doing research. Recently, we added people with technical backgrounds as well, because we have a sandbox to test ideas on mobile financial services. So very, very wide range of profiles, actually.
And now most of those people where is everybody located? You are in London, right?
Yeah, I am in London. We have about a little bit under, I think, 2/3 of the team in London. So that's the GSMA's headquarters. But we do have a significant presence in region. So we have an office in Nairobi, which is largely staffed by Mobile for Development members with about 20 people. I think we have a dozen people in Asia Pacific, in 6 or 7 countries, and we have also a handful of people in the US as well.
Okay. And how do you connect the day-to-day work to like the end user or the person who's ultimately benefiting from the projects? Do you do anything to make that, to visualize that for your team, or like how do you besides numbers, like how do you turn that into stories or
So that's actually critical to what we do, from end to end. Actually, you end with the stories, and I think it's a good one, because we try and I think there's something that's changed in the past 5 years. Just give the end user a voice and the ability to share their own story, and so on. That's actually quite important. It's important for us also to like make sure that they do it in a dignifying way. So that's at one end of the spectrum, but a lot of the work we do is also understanding user needs. So again, there's a bit of research done on that. There's a lot of focus in particular areas that's been put on user experience. For instance, I'm thinking of our agriculture team, who's done a lot to understand how do you build a successful service for smallholder farmers who have specific needs, specific users, and so on. And basically, I would say that the more you build around the end user, the more likely you are to build a successful product or service. So that's extremely important for us. At the end of the day, the way I like to think about it is that you sometimes hear about people looking for $1 billion ideas when they start startup and so on. We start with billion people problems or billion people opportunities. And I mentioned some of them already, like there's the issue of connectivity, which is actually more a usage issue than a connectivity issue, but we can come back to that. There's gender, there's people with disabilities, identity is also a big one. Smallholder farmers, obviously, like billions of people still rely on agriculture. So we start with the user and then build our support from the ground up.
Okay. And which areas or which projects are you most proud of, or do you find most interesting from what you have worked on over the past years?
So this is the hard part, obviously. So I started at GSMA 7.5 years ago now. I first worked on gender for 2.5 years, which is an area which I knew nothing about in the very beginning, and I've learned a lot. And I mean, for anyone who doesn't believe in the importance of making sure that we build services, but more generally a society and economy that's equal for men and women, like look into this, because there's a lot to be done there, and a lot of potential.
So
and then I worked.
Were you interested in that already? Did you go to GSMA to work on that, or when did you get interested more in these kind of topics? Was it already before that, or was it when you went to GSMA?
So that's quite interesting. That's what I went to work for GSMA for. I was working on the mobile operator side. I was working with Orange, focusing on innovation on the Africa and Middle East footprint. Okay. And the GSMA at the time reached out to us and said, well, you know what, you need to look at gender. And it used to be a topic that was more looked at from a CSR, almost a foundation of philanthropy topic, like, oh yeah, let's do something for women. And actually, what I really liked about the GSMA's approach was like, and something we're still very true to, is they started by, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also the right thing to do for business. Mm-hmm. You can't turn a blind eye on half of your addressable market. That doesn't make sense. And I think this resonated with mobile operators more and more as those triple or double digit growth numbers went to single digit growth numbers, and they had to look for new opportunities. And they suddenly realized, like, okay, 70%, in some cases 70, 80% of their customer base, in particular for higher value services, were men. So how do you create services that attract value for women? How do you make sure that they're included and so on? And then you create this kind of value proposition where you have the impact and the commercial value at the same time. So yeah, this is what I thought was extremely powerful at the time.
But then why did you decide to work on that at the GSMA and not at Orange, for example, at a commercial entity?
That's a good point. I think it was probably a bit too early to work on this fully at a commercial entity. It was still considered as a side project. I think things have changed a lot for Orange and other mobile operators since, but it was still early. And actually, I always kind of remember that when I joined the GSMA, I thought I would stay with the GSMA for 2 or 3 years.
Uh-huh.
Mostly because I thought that was the time it would take for to change that mindset and realize the potential and convince basically the private sector that you could look at large socioeconomic challenges and solve them with sustainable solutions that will impact people and will also make money. And it's not happened that fast. I think there's been a lot of eye-opening moments in the past 7.5 years on a lot of areas, but there's still a lot of unexplored areas where we still need to build that understanding and that value proposition. I mentioned refugees. I mentioned persons with disabilities. I think opportunities around the urban poor and so on. There's still a lot that needs to be done, and I think 7.5 years later, the value of digital to solve socioeconomic challenges, as well as the value of bringing a private sector mindset and approach to this area is even more relevant than it was 7.5 years ago. I think we have a good 10-year run ahead of us.
Uh-huh. And do you think in all areas there's still a lot to be done, or are there certain areas where you've seen a lot of progress and then others where now much more progress is needed?
There's been a lot of progress everywhere.
Uh-huh.
But there's still a lot that needs to be done. I mean, you're familiar with the numbers at KRS around connectivity. And I mean, for people who are not aware, I think it's good to remind, to get an idea of the scale that we're talking about. There are about 3.6 billion people who are today using mobile internet, so on 3G, 4G, or even 5G in some cases. It's about 49% of the population. So you still have, we're probably now at 50%. So you have half of the world's population who are not using mobile internet services. But out of these people, most of them are actually connected by a 3G or 4G network. But there are still a lot of barriers to them using the mobile internet, whether it's because it's too expensive, because they don't have the right device, because they don't have relevant services, because they don't have the skills to access them, or because there are issues around privacy and security. So even on the item of connectivity, where you could feel like a lot definitely has been done. Mobile operators and other players have spent, I was about to say billions, but it's trillions of dollars in building those networks. But you still have 8% of the population that needs to be covered, but you still have 43% who are covered but are not using. So think of it as connectivity. Basically, the same challenges and the same opportunities still exist in a lot of other areas.
And do you think, and do you see anything accelerating or changing now because of COVID?
So that's a good question around COVID. One thing that I need to say is that, especially at the beginning, there seemed to be quite a few people thinking that COVID could be that great equalizer or leveler and so on. We need to be extremely careful about that. What we've seen in the past 3 months is what digital technology and mobile technology can bring when you have to absorb a shock or a crisis. In this case, it's a pandemic. Tomorrow it could be a natural disaster, it could be an economic crisis, but the ability for people to kind of keep going with their life, not in a normal way, but at least not stop everything, because they can use mobile and digital technology, because they can still provide some education to their kids, because they can still talk to a doctor online, because they can still work from home. It has massive potential. And I think that's been probably an eye-opener for governments in particular, in that basically, if they don't have the right infrastructure, if they don't have the right building blocks, they won't be able to respond to shocks and be as resilient as they'd want to be. But here, what it also shows is how much work still needs to be done, and that's not just an African issue. For instance, it's true. I mean, I don't have children, but I've talked to a lot of my friends and colleagues who have children, and I think everybody will agree that online education is not as easy as putting your kids in front of Zoom for the full day. This is not how it works. I feel like we've been able and we've adapted very quickly in like using tools that were designed for something else to try and keep some level of continuity, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. Those tools still need to be built, still need to be tested, still need to be rolled out, without forgetting about the trust from users and also the security of their data. Like all of these challenges are there. I like to see them as opportunities. I think in the areas in particular of like education or mobile financial services, a lot will come from this crisis, again, as a wake-up call of what could be done if technology were used. But I will always bring back this point that inclusion is extremely important. Because if we build on only the people who have access today, what we're going to be doing is translating and aggravating inequalities that exist today in our societies and in our economies into the digital world. And I think we all need to be extremely careful not to do that.
But then if we all, if everybody gets more aware about what needs to be done because of the pandemic, do you see more resources, whether it's money or willingness or time becoming available, or is it hard to say, or like for the work you're doing and in general in the industry and the sectors that you're active in?
Yeah, I do believe that like digital solutions will attract more attention, probably more money as well in the medium to long run. What's going to happen in the short run is really hard to predict, and also, I mean, a lot of the funding, whether we're talking about donor funding, but also VC funding and so on, still, unfortunately, majority comes from Europe, the US, or generally speaking, OECD countries, where economies will have shrunk, and therefore the pot of money available might shrink a little bit as well. So there'll be some, there might also be some refocusing on local problems at the very beginning, because we need to fix the impact of what's the crisis had on our own economies and societies. But at the same time, I think maybe the few people who are still thinking that integrating digital into their programming and so on was a nice to have, will now be convinced of the value. If only it is by the amount of time they will have spent on Zoom in the bathroom.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe back to what are some projects that you've seen over the years that work really well or that are going really well? What are you really proud of, that some of the things you've achieved with the team? And what are some best practices maybe also that come out of that? Like what kind of projects and initiatives work well? Are there some best practices you've identified?
Yeah. So to begin with, what I'm most proud of, I think I'm really proud of our whole portfolio. And then again, I was trying to think as I was preparing for our chat, like what are maybe the one or two areas where I think we've had the most impact? And obviously some areas have grown a lot faster than others. I mentioned mobile financial services that literally went from 0 to 1 billion registered accounts in 12 years, which is incredible. But everything is interconnected. So basically, building mobile financial services creates opportunities in a lot of areas. Creates opportunities, for instance, for mobile-enabled utility services.
Yeah.
Like, how do you use this connectivity to improve access and use of electricity? Or energy, generally speaking, or even water or sanitation. A lot of those business cases that benefit from what you learn from one area of your portfolio and so on. So I think that's been incredibly interesting. And then again, looking throughout the portfolio at yeah, how do you make sure that when you're making a breakthrough, whether it's in digital inclusion or financial inclusion and so on, you make sure that this is inclusive and that it doesn't leave behind women or people in rural areas, people with disabilities, refugees. So it's constant thinking and kind of cross-pollinating between the programs. That's super interesting. Now to the second half of your question, which is, I mean, key success factors. I would say there are quite a few. One is make sure you understand the problem and don't stop at just like the macro level, what is happening, but go to the end user and understand, because this is how, I mean, at the end of the day, in an ideal world, the end user would build the solutions to their own problems. And I think this is also a really big trend that we've seen in the past 5 years with the growth of startups in particular in all over the world, is basically this understanding of a local problem and the building of a local solution to a local problem, which is extremely powerful. Yeah. So I think for us, that's a key success factor, is working with players that are close to the ground, whether it's the local mobile operator or local startups or local governments, in some cases city authorities. If you go back to the issue of water sanitation, for instance, that's critical. We're here as a catalyst. We're here providing technical assistance, in some cases providing funding, but these projects need to be rooted on the ground.
Okay.
Another key success factors is make sure that the objectives are aligned from the very beginning. And I think probably was the case a lot more 10 years ago than it is now, but just making sure that, in particular for us, that we stay true to our vision and what we believe in and what we know works and we do well, which is basically, again, the 3 pillars of digital innovation, socioeconomic impact, but that private sector mindset. And if you're not sure from the beginning that all the players understand this mix, I think it's a really good investment to make sure that everything is aligned at that very first stage.
Okay. We have a few minutes left, so I have a last question. Like, where do you see things going? What are the trends, and what do you hope the world will look like in 5 or 10 years? Partially because of the work you're doing.
Oh wow! If I had this kind of glass ball, I'd be probably a lot richer than I am today. I mean, generally speaking, I'm an optimist, so I do. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, we have to look at the challenges we're trying to solve. But when you step back a little, and in particular, like I'm very lucky to work with a very talented team, and with more than 10 years of track record of working on a lot of different topics. And yeah, when you take the time to sit back for a second and look at what's happened in the past 10 years, and 10 years ago there was no mobile money. The mobile financial services existed in a handful of countries, and it was just starting. 10 years ago, we were still talking about 2G in most low and medium income countries, and now we've got, in a lot of countries, 80-90% of the population covered by 3G or 4G. So I feel like we've laid in the past decade a fantastic infrastructure and done so much of the groundwork, like all the digging and the building and so on. Like, not all of it, but a lot of it has been done. And now it's really like about how do you build on top of that? How do you build the services that are really going to impact people in the economy? Of course, you need to keep maintaining your infrastructure. Of course, you need to make sure that it reaches the last mile and the people who are still not connected, either to the internet or to financial services and so on. But there is so much that still needs to be done, and so much that can be done building on these infrastructures. And again, I'm super optimistic because there's also such a strong group of people working on these topics. And I mean, before I started as the head of the department in January, I I started a program working with startups at GSMA, and then managed a second program also working mostly with startups. And I mean, the most energizing thing you can do, and if you really need to build up your optimism, is just spend a couple of days with these people. I mean, the level of drive, the level of talent, the level of like the vision that they have, it's like, yeah. And again, the infrastructure is there, and what they're going to build on it is going to be mind blowing. And that ranges from education, agriculture, financial services, health, even civic tech, like the way we can bring people online, and yeah, the opportunity to supplement our brick and mortar societies and economies with strong digital components. Again, as long as they're inclusive, as long as they're trustworthy, as long as they respect people's privacy. I mean, the sky is the limit, literally.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, it's like the infrastructure is there, and now it's seeing what these homegrown local startups and solutions are going to build on top of that in the coming years. And it's hard to imagine for us, because it's going to be local solutions that are locally relevant. So yeah, that's going to be super.
So many of these seeds have been sown already. There's like a lot of investment that's been made. If you look at the community of early stage and impact investors, it's like they're doing all the groundwork, supporting those startups, and yeah, there's a lot that's gonna hatch in the past 1, 2, 3, 5 years that's gonna have a lot of impact.
Great. Thanks a lot. Is there anything you want to add, or at least where can people follow you or read more about you if they want to know more?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. This was really interesting. And then for anyone who's interested in learning more, we have obviously our website, gsma.com/m4d for the number. And then we're also on the usual social media, and you can follow me on LinkedIn or on Twitter, for instance.
All right. Thanks again so much, Max, for joining, and thanks everybody for watching. And we'll be back next time with another episode of Enabling Tomorrow. Bye-bye.